I'm Kurt Stidham. I've been in the area, about 31 years. Um, Grew up in this area, pretty much stayed in the area, and moved out to Irvine for a little while, but moved back into this area. And Irvine's not too far away, so been here since the mid-70s. He was my advisor. He worked with me in the Young Men's program. At the time of the accident, I was can't remember if I was a teacher or a priest at that time, because he worked so closely with us, with all the young men at the time. I believe I just turned a priest, so I was 16 at the time.
Did you like him as a young men's leader?
Oh yeah, he was great. I mean, he was, I think that's the thing probably that everybody remembers about Kyle. He was just another one of the kids. You know, you could tell by the way he treated us and the way he played with us that he loved us, and he just wanted to help us do the best that we could do. I probably knew him for 2 or 3 years before the Catalina incident. So at the time, the Catalina incident occurred when I was 16 or 17, but I knew him. They were in our ward prior to that.
Yeah, so you had he worked with you quite a while.
Yeah, he was. As long as I can remember, he was one of the main characters in the Young Men program. You know, at that time it was President Whitesides worked with us quite a bit. He was our teacher's quorum advisor, and Kyle was working with us at the same time. There was just kind of that group of boys that, at that age frame, those were our leaders. I think cheerful. I just remember Kyle was always upbeat, always happy, always cheerful, and you know, he was loving too. You know, cheerful and loving, I guess, would be 2 good words to describe him. He was good. I mean, there was just a goodness about him, and I think that you know, maybe that's just one of the little perks or blessings that occurs when somebody good gets taken from this life, is that they're remembered for that. Maybe that's part of it, because he was young and strong and full of energy and happiness and goodness, and then he was gone. So I think, you know, those are maybe reasons why we remember, but they're good reasons. You know, I don't know anybody that. I never saw Kyle upset. I mean, I know he's human. You know, I'm sure he was upset at times, but I never saw him upset. I never saw him mad at the youth, and I've seen other, you know, good members of the church that. You know, good people, all of us have our fill when it comes to working with youth sometimes. Sometimes we, you know, enough is enough when you're dealing with a bunch of kids. But Kyle seemed, I don't remember him ever being angry or upset, but we all respected him. So I know he didn't let us get away with a lot of garbage, because you don't respect a leader that lets you get away with everything. But I think they're probably 2 peas in a pod, because you know, Karen has been cheerful and upbeat through her trials and challenges. You know, even at the time of Kyle's passing and everything, the funeral and those things, you know, she was, you know, she was compassionate to the rest of us that went through it also. And so I think compassion would be a good word also to describe her. And strong. You can't go through this and not be strong. That I did that tape, I was going through some pretty big challenges in my life, and I can't even remember what I said on the tape. I just remember that at the time I just felt very moved by the Spirit that I needed to do that, and it brought comfort to me to do that also, to express to them some of my feelings and some of life's lessons that I learned from the challenge of going through Kyle's passing. Even after all these years, it's still a pretty emotional thing for me to talk about for a lot of reasons. As I said, Kyle was working with us in the Young Men's program, and we were getting ready to go to youth conference, and youth conference that year was over at Catalina Island. And so, we were all talking about the different activities that we could be doing over there, and I had been certified in scuba diving, and so Kyle, said, that when he was in Hawaii, he'd done a lot of diving, and he was certified in diving, and so we kind of just decided, okay, well, that would be a fun thing to do. There was a couple other people that weren't going with us, but we'd heard there were other people in the stake that also were going to, be going scuba diving. So we figured that was a good activity to do. So Kyle asked me if I could get some of the gear for him, and so I rented the gear for Kyle and I, and we went to youth conference. And I don't remember what the time frame was as to how long we'd been there, but I imagine it was probably the following day after we got there that we had some free time, and we decided to go diving at that time. And there was Kyle and I that were actually scuba diving, and then there was Randy Knight, a good friend of mine, another young man that was in the ward at the time. He was just going to snorkel on top. And so Kyle and I went in the water, and we swam out not too far, probably 100, 200 feet maybe. And we actually before we went in, we did a check on each other. Everything seemed to be fine. And we got out a ways. The water wasn't too deep. It was only 15 feet deep, maybe 20 feet at the most. And it's kind of in a shallow bay, a lagoon area. So it wasn't like there was a lot of depth or current or anything. So we went out, and we went down on the bottom, and kind of gave each other the thumbs up, and we started swimming together, looking at the fish and stuff, like you do when you scuba dive, and we were just kind of separated a little bit and going through the kelp, and at that point we hadn't been down very long at all, and Kyle was kind of behind me and to the right a little bit, and we swam through just a small little kelp forest, and I turned and he wasn't there, so I just kind of waited and looked for him a little bit, and he wasn't there, so I swam back the way we came from, and I looked for him and didn't see him, and so I came to the surface and kind of waited for him, because that's what you're supposed to do. If you lose your buddy, you're supposed to surface. So I came to the surface and looked for him and figured he'd come up, and he didn't come up, and so I looked a little more, and Randy was swimming around, and I hollered at Randy and I said, hey, look for Kyle, see where Kyle's bubbles are, So we started we kind of were still just, we weren't really super concerned at that point yet because it had only been a minute, you know. So we still were just kind of swimming and looking at the fish and looking in the same area for Kyle. And after a couple of minutes, I started to get a little bit panicked about it. And so we started swimming back and forth kind of in a grid, just looking for him where we had been. And didn't see him and didn't see any bubbles. We looked on the surface of the water trying to see where some bubbles were coming up, and we didn't see any of that. And so we just kept swimming and looking, and Randy, he swam back towards shore where I swam out away from shore because I figured, well, that's the direction Kyle was going. Maybe he got ahead of me, you know, when I looked behind. Maybe he wasn't behind, but maybe he had gone ahead. And so I was going out and Randy was going in, and Randy hollered to me that he found Kyle, and I mean, he was pretty panicked at the time, and Randy tried, Kyle was laying on the bottom, and I got to Randy dove, and I got to Randy before Randy even got to the bottom to get to Kyle. And so I saw Kyle on the bottom, and he didn't have his regulator in his mouth. And so at that point, Randy had got a hold of him and was starting to swim up. And I swam down, and I grabbed a hold of him, and we brought him to the surface. And we tried to do mouth to mouth, but it you know, in the ocean it's pretty hard to do. Plus, you know, it was he had drowned already at that point. It was, his lungs were full of seawater. So we yelled, and there was a dock that some of the kids were on, and there was a rowboat on the dock. So Randy and I started yelling, and one of the kids got in the boat and rowed out to us, and they grabbed Kyle and tried to pull him up into the boat. And at that time, Randy and I had been holding him up for quite a while, and that's when I realized that Kyle still had his weight belt on also. So we ditched his weight belt, and they pulled him up into the boat, and then they took him back into the shore. And I think Randy swam in, and I started swimming in, and I got about 3/4 of the way, and then the adrenaline let off from me, and the fatigue of having held him up, and the fatigue from the emotion got to me, and I started to go down. And a friend of mine on the beach, he ran in, grabbed me, and pulled me in onto the beach. And that's, as I was coming in at that point, when I kind of started going down, like I said, is when the adrenaline let off and the emotions took over, and I just kind of lost it. You know, I knew what was going on and started crying, and it was just, you know, pretty much beside myself with, you know, despair of what was going on. And so as I got pulled onto the beach by my buddy, they were doing CPR on Kyle at the time, and things just didn't look very good. And they pulled me off into a room, and my bishop at the time, actually I must have already moved into the other ward, because my bishop was Bishop Rogers, who was the bishop of the Mission Viejo 2nd Ward at the time. I just couldn't stop crying. And one of the more powerful spiritual experiences that I had as a younger man and in my life actually occurred at that time, as he placed his hands upon my head and gave me a blessing. there was just a complete feeling of peace and calm. And I knew that whatever the outcome was, that the Lord's hand was in it, that He was watching over what was occurring. It wasn't just happenstance. So at that point, I was able to walk out, go back down to the beach where they were still working on Kyle. At that point, the lifeguards from Avalon pulled up in a small boat, and they loaded Kyle on, and Randy and I, and we all went to the hospital in Avalon. And they did CPR on Kyle all the way back in the boat. And we were in the hospital for a short time, probably 15 or 20 minutes, when they came out and told us that he had passed away, that he had expired, and that had basically occurred, that there never was really any chance of reviving him, that he had expired while he was under the water. So that was that part of what occurred. I don't know how much you've talked to other people. My wife, Jamie, at the time at that time she was one of the youth that was back at the camp, and she just recalls that they all got together, all the youth and the leaders, and they offered a prayer and they sang hymns. And that was from their accounts and from her accounts that there was a very strong spirit there. And that pretty much sums up what occurred on Catalina. We continued with the youth conference, and tried to go forward with that as much as possible. But there was definitely a very strong spirit that pervaded that conference and the lives of those that were involved in it at the time.
Was that the last day?
Well, spiritually as a youth, I had a testimony at the time. I wasn't a wayward youth. I didn't have those kind of challenges and problems. But it just, it was a real testimony just to feel the power of the priesthood. A lot of people probably don't get to experience that so early in their life. What that did for me was, again, it strengthened my testimony on a different level. After that, I served a mission, and I served a mission in an area that was very difficult, very challenging. I dealt a lot with death, dealt a lot with death with children, and it gave me a testimony and a perspective of the plan of salvation that I think most people of my age didn't have, and maybe even a lot of people that are a lot older. And that prepared me, kind of set the framework for building my testimony, which prepared me for my mission, which again took it to another level of understanding the plan of salvation and the importance of different aspects of it. And then again, many years later, it came into play again when my own wife passed away. Again, it gave me the strength to know that, you know, yeah, it's hard. It's unbearably hard, but it's okay. It's part of the plan. It's just one of those challenges that some of us go through. I think especially at that time, because that was when my wife had passed away. I'm not getting emotional about my wife. I'm getting emotional about Karen. There's no way that anybody can understand what it's like to lose a spouse. At that time, I was devastated beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And even though through the years since Kyle's death, I had basically been someone in the shadows for the Hess family, I knew what, or I had seen what Karen had done, how she had continued to go forward, raised her family, stayed strong in the gospel, and, you know, did those things that she needed to do to be faithful to her covenants and those vows and covenants that she made with Kyle. And to see the strength that she had to go through that gave me hope at that time that maybe I could do it too. Something that, again, that's one of those things where, for me, when my wife passed away, the Spirit was so strong in my life. I mean, incredibly strong. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Lord was directing my movements on a day-to-day basis because I couldn't. I was basically incapable of it. There was just, I couldn't have functioned, like I did. And my wife, unlike Kyle, whose death was an accident, my wife's death also was an accident, but she had been ill for some time, and she'd had some health problems, and so both of us had talked, and we had a feeling that she wasn't going to live to be an old lady. We had no clue it was going to be, as young as she was. But I didn't intend to get married again. We'd talked about it, and I said, well, I'm just going to go hunting and fishing more if something happens, I don't need to get married again. We had 3 children and had a very fulfilling marriage, but when she passed away, it was made known to me very clearly that I was to marry again, and it happened a lot quicker than I wanted it to. And when I say that, I mean, I don't want to go into my past so much, but the Spirit directed. There's no doubt. There was definite direction. And so I'm sure that, Karen had similar experiences just in other areas of her life, where the Spirit was just taking care of you in the way that you needed to be taken care of. For me, I see all of these events as stepping stones of growth spiritually. I don't see them as isolated events or things that happened in the past. Especially as I get older, I see that it's all part of they're all connected with a thread, and it's all part of the plan. And as we go through these challenges, as we grow, I mean, we can either choose to grow from a challenge, or we can choose for the challenge to crush us. And as we grow, as we have these kind of challenges and other challenges, as we overcome them, really the only way to overcome them and the only way to deal with them is to turn to the Lord. And I guess in a short, that's where I see myself in all of this, is that these are events that have caused me to develop a relationship with my Heavenly Father and with my Savior. And I think that if I think part of the role for me is that, having that testimony, I hope that I can help other people to get through their challenges and their difficulties by understanding that you don't have to go through them by yourself, and the Lord doesn't want you to go through them by yourself. You said what kind of spiritual experiences, you mentioned about that, and at Kyle's passing, events that occurred on my mission, with dealing with so much tragedy, and then having the same tragedy of losing my wife, those events have caused me to really want to submit my life to my Heavenly Father, because I don't have any control over it. And the only real peace that you get is from knowing that you're doing what your Heavenly Father wants you to do. You try and get peace from worldly sources, and it's empty. It isn't there. I had a good friend of mine pass away this last week, and I went to his funeral, and he was Catholic, and it was just empty. There was just nothing. It just felt like a vacant, empty hole of grief and despair. There was no hope. There was no happiness. There was no peace. As I was saying, there's just, without the understanding of the plan of salvation, there's nothing but grief and despair. There's no hope and there's no peace, because all you can focus on is the loss, instead of, the beautiful reuniting later, and just, sometimes I fail at finding the right words to describe it, to describe how I feel, but it's just, of course there's grief, and of course there's sadness, but there's also a sense of peace and happiness and comfort that comes when you have the gospel perspective. the testimony, how do you explain it? To me, it's not even a testimony. It's just what it is. I mean, it is a testimony, but I mean, it just, it's driven me to go forward. It's created in me a desire not to just get by in this life and survive, but to do better, so that there's no question when it's over that I've done the best that I can, and hopefully at that point that'll be good enough. For whatever reason, there is an underlying bond that I feel to the Hess family, even though they don't necessarily all know me, and I haven't been in their life, especially, you know, in the children's lives and stuff. But I just, I have a lot of respect and love for their mother and their father. Kyle was a great man, and again, going back to experiences that I've had, and the Lord just doesn't take everybody when they're in such a position in their life. I firmly believe that Kyle was called home. Again, I don't think it was happenstance, and I know that there was a mission that he needed to fulfill on the other side of the veil. And again, that just, you know, that's my way of looking at things sometimes, that allows me to understand and to be comforted and to deal with the tragedy of these things when we lose someone that we love. What I would say would probably just be, they have every reason to be proud of their heritage. Be proud of their dad, who they are, and proud of their mother for what she's done. I think those are good parting words.